Hi, I'm Miss Sarah, and this is At Home Makerspace, where every week I show you how to make fun projects with things you can find at home. This month, we've been exploring different art projects in our Arttober series. And so, to wrap up the month, I wanted to share a simple DIY clay recipe that you can use to make clay with a few common household supplies. You can let this clay air dry or you can bake it, and it's really easy to make. Let me show you how to do it. To make this clay, you'll need 1 cup of baking soda, 1/4 cup of cornstarch, and 3/4 cups of water. You'll also need a small saucepan, a spoon, and a stove. Since this project does use a stove, some of you may need a grown-up to help you. And remember, please be careful around a hot stove. Place your saucepan on the stove and then add all of the ingredients: the water, the cornstarch, and the baking soda. Now grab your spoon and stir everything together to form a thick paste. Now we're going to turn our heat up to high. Keep stirring until your mixture comes to a boil. You should see large bubbles start to form. When it's boiling, turn the heat down to medium. Keep stirring, and after about 5 minutes, your mixture should be very thick, almost like thick mashed potatoes. When it's thick enough, remove your pan from the heat. You'll want to transfer your mixture into either a bowl with a covering, like plastic wrap, or a container with a lid. After your mixture has cooled for 10 to 15 minutes, you can transfer it to your container. Be careful, this mixture will still be pretty hot, so if you need a grown-up to help you, make sure to ask. Now cover your container to keep your clay from drying out. This clay does dry out pretty quickly, so I do recommend using it soon after making your clay. If you don't use all your clay right away, you can keep it a little bit longer by spritzing it with some water and wrapping it tightly in plastic wrap to keep it from drying out. And that's how you make your own clay. Now, a quick cleanup tip for you. If any of you, like me, end up with a hard crust at the bottom of your saucepan, simply run hot water into the pan and let it sit. The hot water will dissolve that crust and make it much easier to clean. Also, if any of you are interested in a no-cook recipe that doesn't use the stove at all, I will include an alternative recipe in the description. So now that you have your clay, here are a few sculpting techniques you might like to try, along with some helpful hints. Keep your clay covered until you're ready to use it. The first thing I decided to make was a little snowman. So I started by rolling some clay into a ball, like so. And I'm going to repeat that process 2 more times. Now, as I'm doing this, I should let you know that after my clay had hardened, my snowman did break into 3 separate pieces. So, if you are planning to make a sculpture, I would recommend you try to make it in just one big piece rather than making smaller pieces and sticking them together. Using a similar technique, you can also make beads. So I'm going to grab a small piece of clay, and as before, I'm going to roll it into a sphere between my hands. When I like the shape, I'm going to grab a toothpick and put a hole through the middle. Wiggle your toothpick around a little to make the hole bigger, This will make it easier to string your beads after they have hardened. Another technique you can try is rolling out your dough. So the first thing you'll need to do is to spread a little bit of the baking soda on your surface. This is similar to putting flour down on your surface before you knead bread. And it'll keep my clay from sticking to my table. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and set the clay down on the table, and then I'm going to grab something to roll it out. Now I could use a big rolling pin like this, but it's a little too big for the project. So I'm actually going to use an unsharpened pencil. Feel free to grab whatever's the right size that you might happen to have around the house. Alright, so now I'm just going to roll my clay, and to keep it from sticking, I'm going to occasionally pick it up and flip it over. Keep rolling until your clay is pretty thin, and you also want to make sure that the clay is the same thickness throughout. You don't want one side that's really thick and one side that's really thin. It should be the same thickness. And once your clay is rolled out, go ahead and grab your cookie cutter. So just like you would with cookie dough, I'm going to set my cookie cutter onto my clay and push all the way through. And if your cookie cutter sticks a bit, you can actually dust your cookie cutter with some baking soda to keep it from sticking. And there we go. Next, I'll show you how to make coils. So start by grabbing some clay and rolling it on the table to form a long, thin snake or coil. Keep doing this until you like the size, and try to make sure that it's the same width all the way across. Now, one thing you can do with a coil is make something called a coil pot. So I'm going to be wrapping my coil into a circle shape. And once the base is as big as I'd like it to be, I'm going to start stacking my coil on top of the coil beneath it. This gives it a sort of 3D shape, kind of a bowl shape. I'm going to roll out another one and show you this in a little more detail. Okay, so now you can see I'm layering this coil on top of the last coil, and I'm just going to continue wrapping it on top until I reach the end. Now I'm going to go in and smooth over any gaps and just try to make my coils kind of smooth on the inside. And that is what my coil pot looks like. And finally, you can press a textured item into your clay to create an impression. Start by sprinkling some baking soda onto your clay to keep your object from sticking. Then place your object onto the clay and push gently. When you pick it up again, you can see the impression that your object has made. And those have been a few techniques that you can try with your homemade clay. Of course, there are all kinds of other things that you can make, so have fun experimenting. When you've finished making your projects, you have two options. You can leave the clay out to air dry, or you can bake it in the oven. To let your clay air dry, leave it somewhere to dry overnight. In the morning, you may need to flip over some of the pieces to make sure they dry on the other side. Alternatively, you can bake your clay at 170 degrees Fahrenheit. Place your projects on an oven-safe tray like a cookie sheet. Then place it in the oven for about an hour. After an hour, you'll want to take the sheet out and carefully flip them over, then return them to the oven for another hour. And if you need help using the oven, be sure to ask a grown-up. You should also remember that the thicker your clay is, the longer it will take to dry. So the bead on the left will take longer than the bead on the right. Whether you're baking or letting it air dry, you might need to adjust your dry time based on how thick your project is. Some of you may have noticed that blue bead on my tray. Well, you can add color to your clay in one of two ways. One option is to mix the color right into the clay. In addition to your clay, you'll need some food coloring and some gloves. I'm starting by putting on some gloves because I don't want the food coloring to get all over my hand. Grab some clay and put a drop or two of food coloring into your clay. Now begin to mush the clay around. I'm actually going to grab a little bit more and I'm going to roll it, squish it, and as I do this, you'll see the color start to distribute through the clay. Now, one thing I should mention is that when you add the food coloring, you're adding a little bit of extra liquid to your clay. That can make it a bit sticky, so grab some baking soda if your clay is too sticky, and just sprinkle a little bit on and work that in. After a while, your clay will get this really cool marbled effect, which I actually really liked, so I decided to stop here. But of course, if you want your clay to be all one color, you would just keep mixing until the color is spread all the way through evenly. There's my marbled clay. Your second option is to add color to the surface of your clay after it has finished drying. Some options for adding color this way include paint pens, tempera paint, or Sharpie markers. So if you choose tempera paint, add a little bit with a brush. One thing to note is that this clay really absorbs paint, so you might have to go in with a second coat like I am here if you want a brighter color. Paint pens are another option that work well, especially if you want to do detailed painting. But again, the clay likes to absorb the paint, so you might have to do a couple of layers. Permanent markers also work well for adding detail, but I did find that the marker bled a little bit into the clay. Don't forget that you can combine these coloring supplies like I did to make this bead using paint and permanent marker. I hope you guys have lots of fun making things out of homemade clay. If you do make something, we'd love to see it, so please take a picture and share it with us at the library. You can do so through our Facebook at www.facebook.com/FHCPL. Through our Instagram, our handle is @FHCPL, or you can send us an email. Our email address is makerspace@findlaylibrary.org. We hope you've enjoyed learning how to make all kinds of art projects this month for our Arttober series. Be sure to tune in next week for another brand new video. See you then! Bye!